Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have with me a very special guest, T.L. Coughlin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah. Anytime. I was really, like we talked about recording, I was really excited once I saw your book. I was just like, follow. Yes, please.
It's a must. Oh, thanks. I'm so glad.
Yeah, it's awesome. If you guys don't know, I follow a lot of people on, I'm sure you guys know by now because I talk about it all the time, but I find all these people on Twitter in particular. So I feel like Twitter's like my kind of water cooler sort of thing. And, find a lot of people that I enjoy. And yeah, I was really excited to, as soon as I clicked on your profile, I saw that book cover and I just looked at the title and I was like, yeah, I'm in. And then when I saw the blurb, but I don't even think I got more than 3 lines in, and I was just like, yep.
That's awesome.
It's on my Kindle right now, so I'm actually excited to get to it
That's
after
fantastic.
my other read. Yeah, it's awesome. We're gonna start right in with that first question, which I'm really interested to hear. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
I would say it's rather unique, but also not. COVID would definitely played a part in it. So way back when I was in high school, I actually was part of a creative writing class, and I was super excited. I loved it absolutely, but being raised in Canadian Asian family, it's I'm half and half, so it's a little bit more strict, and it was never something that I thought I could necessarily pursue. But I love the course, so I took it, and then my teacher. She basically read one of my short stories, which was about my grandfather, my yaya on my mother's side. And she says, "You have what it takes. You're a true writer. This is fantastic. Please pursue this. Like, you have what it takes to get far." And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool. Like, that's super nice of her. Like, not just an A, but also, those words of, kindness and stuff." But I never thought about it after that, because I went to humanities biology in university, and then basically only until COVID, until I could finally like breathe after I got, like the consistent job and everything. I went through my yearbook and I saw that message from her, and I was like, why have I never pursued this? Like, it was such an important part of my life. Books are such a huge part of my life. I just kept sitting there. I'm like, why? And then I actually met up with PL Stewart, and he's the one that ended up publishing a book. And I was like, that's possible. He was the first person I knew that actually published a book. So it made it so much more real. And I'm like, this is a thing. This is something that I can actually pursue. So he told me exactly what you're saying with the whole water cooler thing. Go on Twitter, connect on Twitter, create that author platform, get your ideas out there and see what it would be like, right? He's like, test the waters. So I tweeted this thing that was basically the hook for my book, which was why are there dragon mythology in various cultures across the globe? Like, sure, it could be dinosaurs, but that's boring. You don't want, like, dinosaurs are overdone now. And I'm like, why? So that one question basically set me off into this entire journey. And I wrote Of Us and Them, and I absolutely loved it. Went through like so many courses to make sure I knew what was current, what was like the true techniques, I guess, to writing, and making sure I went through the betas. I learned all about the literary world, which is expansive. There's just so much to learn, and you never know. And once I drafted it, I started querying. So that whole querying journey was like a monster in and of itself. I don't think I was technically emotionally prepared for it, because you really have to be emotionally prepared. But it was a really cool adventure to just try and see and get, like he said, get my idea out there and see what it would be like. So at the end, it was always the same. It was, this is a really, really cool concept. You have fantastic writing, but it's too niche. It's too niche. It doesn't fit. And I was like, sitting there and I'm like, that's cool and all, but where exactly does my book fit into the industry? And so I came across this small publisher called Darkstroke, and they specialize in dark fiction. And they were just entering the young adult sphere. And so I sat there and I was like, okay, this is really fascinating, because mine, it definitely is dark fiction. It's a murder mystery wrapped up in science fantasy. And awesome. It's a huge like look at like the human condition and fate versus future, and where you can like play your role in this massive expanse of a universe, right? And so I submitted to them, and within, I think it was a month, they reached out. They said, "I'd love to see your full." I sent them the full, and then within a week I was signed. So awesome. It was an immediate connection. And I said, you know what, this is the right journey for this book. I still want to query, I still want to get that agent, but for this book specifically, this was the right fit for sure. So it's pretty much where I got to this point. And now I amassed a fantastic group of followers. I'm connecting with tons of people on Twitter. I have my book in my hands now, and I can smell it, breathe it, and it's just such a, it's wild, absolutely wild of a journey, but very, very thankful to be on it for sure. So
that's super cool. I love your cover, by the way. It just like drew
thank
me
you.
in, like as soon as I saw it. And I feel like a lot of them too, it's like hard for the JPEGs, to really draw you in. But yours with the design and the color, I was like, I really need to figure out what this is. So
Right.
I love graphic design. Like I originally wanted to be an
Yeah.
illustrator, so I just get attracted to the art very easily. And I've been talking about it on here, like, yeah, right. Oh, this is so cool.
Yeah, I got
I'm
the
so
rights to
jealous.
it,
I
and it
can't
was
do
just,
that.
oh, it's so stunning.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
honestly so stunning. I'm like, if I could get this done on a wall where, like you said,
Oh,
the
that'd be so
resolution was
cool. Yeah,
nice,
yeah.
I'd be like, that's it. That's my library wall, right? But no, I was really excited because I found those images and I sent them to my publisher. My publisher is really, really good on like cooperating through the cooperative process of creating the cover. They always said like a lot of the times you don't get that choice, you don't get that to put in what you want, to make it something that you're excited about or you're proud of. Like you're gonna be marketing this book until you're blue in the face. So it has to be something that you love. And they're really good about that. So I actually had my own sketch, and I do some like digital artwork on the side.
Oh,
So I
cool.
created it, and then he just made it like really, really nice and fancy and clean, right? So no, I was so excited because it was exactly what I wanted and what I envisioned as I was writing this book, right? And I came across this picture probably like 3 weeks into my writing journey, and I
Oh,
was like,
wow.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I want to emote when people look at that cover and go, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Because it makes you want to read the blurb. Like I was like, oh, that's a really cool title. But then I saw the cover and I was like, okay, now I got to read the blurb. Like I was there within 5 seconds. Yes, I just feel like you need a cover and a title that makes people want to read the blurb. Otherwise,
Yeah,
I feel like they'll just
exactly.
pass it. So yeah, it definitely made me want to read the cover. And then I was like, oh, this is really cool. I like the title. And I was like, flip it over and scroll down on Twitter. And I was like, yep, here we go.
This is it.
Yep,
Yeah,
here we
for
go.
sure. So
And like
yeah.
as always to our audience, we'll have the descriptions and the links and stuff like that all in there. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, Spotify, rss.com, make sure you guys go ahead and check out the description. Check out first book here. It's going to be the first link there. Just do it. Just do it. I've never steered you guys wrong in the past. So
Just do it.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Me and Nike always say it like, just do it. Click on that
Just
author's
do it.
profile.
Yeah, it's so easy. Just 3 words. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it. I
Exactly.
love it.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm really glad that worked out for you. I feel like, that sounds to me like a really good fit, especially somebody, who's allowing you to be you and valuing you, as an author and your decisions and things like that. I just feel like, again, like you said, not everybody gets that. And I feel like it turns them off, from certain publishers or, or publishing, or querying or anything like that. So I'm really happy to hear that, there's companies like yours, who are actually listening to authors, because you guys are the ones that know what you're talking about, particularly about your book. So
Well, there's so many strategies now, right? Like whether it's hybrid, independent, traditional, IPL, Stuart and I have talked about it till, the ends of the earth, right? Just because the definitions are always changing. And now more often, the more choice there is, the better fit it will be, right? So, still querying is definitely a part of my journey. I'm querying my second separate series right now, and I'm
cool.
absolutely loving the process. So hopefully one day it'll be picked up, but because you still have that big of the big five trad, but wherever that ends up, what's the saying? Shoot for the moon, but if you miss, you land among the stars. That's kind of exactly what I'm just going for. So hope for the best. Anything else less is still really awesome. So yeah.
What's interesting, you say that you're still querying, because I have a friend who had said that, he went, tried doing traditional, didn't work. So he did Amazon, and then, but like through the querying process, he got a couple of things for feedback that he changed. Well, that ended up helping him a lot more with sales, because he went back, rebranded his book and things, and changed a few particular things. So I definitely feel like, even if somebody just gives you good feedback, and they see books all the time, even if it's like an advertising thing or something like that, even if it's not a writing thing, I feel like, it's still good to know exactly what they're looking for, particularly if you are doing a new series. So yeah, that's super cool.
Exactly.
Is that going to be I don't know if you can talk about it yet, but is that going to be set in like the same universe, or is that going to be like its own separate thing? Or
Total different separate thing.
oh,
Yeah.
that's
So I
cool.
went YA fantasy with this. So I went back to my, my childhood reads and everything. And I basically, because I'm mixed race, all of my main characters always multiracial. So Everin, she's half everything. That's the entire point of the book, is like human evolution and kind of combining
Cool.
genes and combining cultures and combining everything so that you're at this like apex evolution. But for the second one, it's about a jester who's half fae.
Oh, that's
So, but
cool.
fae in this world, yeah, it's inspired
Sold.
by
Sold.
right, yeah. So it's actually set in like a Sicilian inspired island, and I'm part Sicilian, part Maltese. So for me, like the Italian side is really, really strong as well. So I kind of wanted to feed into that. And yeah, so it's basically her journey, but it's based off of the Italian origins of Morgan Le Fay. And Morgan Le Fay is like one of the coolest characters that's so undersold, because King Arthur takes the lead and then
Merlin
leaves her in the dust. Yeah. And she's such a complex character. So I kind of reinvented her origins through a couple of smaller myths about her within Europe, but mostly within Italy and France. So there's like this there's this thing called the Fata Morgana, which is basically Morgan Le Fay in Italian, but across the sea they kept seeing this illusion of a floating island, and this is real. Like this is actually real.
I've researched that. Yeah.
Yeah, you've seen that, right?
A lot.
So they always say that, oh, it's Morgana's castle in the sky. And I said, why would she want a castle in the sky? Why would she want to be removed from her people, right? And so that's kind of what the story focuses on. So it's really fun. It was a total different experiment, but at the same time the same, because I'm taking myths and giving a different explanation for them. Rather than retelling them, it's reimagining them. So that's definitely something I seem to be really enjoying, because I don't know, myths and legends were always so cool as a kid. Like I would always tell my dad, can you tell me about this one? Can you tell me about this one? Like, how about this one? Like he would quiz me on like all the Lord of the Rings, myths, legends, details. So for me, it's just so ingrained, like, I guess part of me that at that point, like inspiration has to come from within somewhere, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, congratulations. You just sold one and you're not even done yet. So
thank you.
You let me know as soon as you're ready and I'll set my pre-order. That just sounds awesome.
Sounds good.
That's super cool. Thank you. I love that though, because like I'm like I have like a Roman legion. I'm taking the Lost Roman Legion and I'm explaining why they're lost. So I'm doing like historical urban fantasy. I'm having them.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, like come up against zombies. So then I'm only going to have a couple left. And then later on, as they're traveling back to Rome, I'm going to have them, I don't know which order yet, but I'm going to have them, the second book, like encounter werewolves, and then like third one, like vampires in Rome.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so fun.
But I love that kind of stuff. Like you got, I mean, I'm totally with you. I love that kind of stuff. I would like to do like an Avengers Assemble style urban fantasy where like you take like I have a really cool young Valkyrie, like half Valkyrie, and then I like have a whole thing with her, and then I got like a monster hunter essentially. I'm coming up with like a whole.
That's so cool.
Yeah, like I just love that stuff. I love combining urban fantasy with mythology. Like Dirk Ashton's one of those, but Patricia Briggs, they both I feel like do such a good job. Patricia Briggs, like I'll read anything she writes if she puts in mythology. Like I'm always so jealous of her. It's like I just feel like she does such a good job bringing mythology into our modern world and creating these amazing clashes of characters. But yeah, I'm right there with you.
Exactly.
I love that kind of thing.
Right.
So sold. You let me know.
Awesome. I love it.
I can give you my money now if you want to reserve. That's fine. Like,
I should put that in my query, right? I already
have
one
you should.
sold,
yeah.
So please and thank you.
She's like, this guy does nothing. Like this guy's poor wife has to watch him haul books home all the time. Like I have so many paperbacks I've been going through for friends that I haven't even gotten to my Kindle that my wife bought me over Christmas. So it's like I've been so busy with work but yeah, I'm like, that just sounds very interesting. I think they're also, you said like, your niche, like that's what they were saying. I think there needs to be like a fantasy niche, like in like a subgenre, and then a sci-fi one. So that if you're somebody like me and you like, those kinds of things and more unique things, like you and Diane Dotson are very similar, I think, with mixing fantasy and sci-fi and, mythology too. And I just think that that's what I want. So I just want to be able to go to that subgenre on Amazon and just find your books
and be able to find it. Yeah. It seems to be its own beast right now. And this is the thing, like a lot of people in the industry are realizing you have to have a unique idea, right? That's always the point. And it's like, okay, but the tropes and the, the cliches and the fantastic things that make you excited, they're usually just stuck to one genre, and you're just sitting there
Exactly.
and you're like, yeah, but why can't we meld them, right?
Yep.
So that was a huge thing, which was the genre blending. And I was just like, this is so me, because also, hi, I'm mixed, right? So everything about me is going to be mixed, whether
Yeah.
it's my books, my so for me it's just such an important thing to just kind of, and you're also reaching so many more people from
Yeah.
that point, right? Like
That's
the
a great point.
audience is so huge too, right? So it seems kind of odd that sometimes you might get that, that doesn't seem right for me. It's like, well, I'm diving into two different worlds. But then they say, well, where does it fit on a bookshelf, right? In the bookstores. I'm like, that is a valid question. It's
On
a
my
very valid
shelf,
question.
it fits it.
On my shelf in the
Well, if
middle.
it's on, it's Dan. It fits on Dan's shelf.
Yeah,
Right there at the
exactly.
top. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
totally agree
So
with
I
you
mean,
though.
like,
Like, yeah.
I just find like YA especially is really starting to do that genre blending. Like they're really
Yeah.
aiming for that. Like you said, urban fantasy and like contemporary fantasy, or blending that with, I've seen some science fantasies coming out too, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like, it's really exciting because I know that this is going to be like the future of
Oh,
it, which is like, there's going to be no genre, just what's cool, what's not,
yep.
what hits you and what doesn't, right? So
No, totally.
yeah, for sure.
No,
For
totally.
sure.
I was just saying, I just agree with you too. Like I was just talking to a friend of mine, like even like with characterization, like because I had these characters for my own fantasy world, and I was like, okay, and I was like, well, they're missing something, and I was like, oh, I was like, I just wasn't using the right characters. So then I was like, I created much better countries, much better, I took a lot of different cultures and just made them like just super cool compared to the.
Yeah.
I was like, my friend goes, okay, you want to know what your problem is? I go, yeah, please. Please tell me, because it's just boring for me to write at this point. He goes, it's just European. Like it's just. He's like, you're in the UK, and he goes, do you even like to read those types of books? I'm like, you know what? I'm like, I really don't. I'm like, I'm really into
Right.
Forgotten
Yeah.
Realms and Dragonlance. I feel like they have a lot of different characters from different races, different species, whatever you want to call it. They have a lot of different cultures, and I was like, that's what I enjoy reading. He goes, well, that's what you should write. So that's like
Yeah.
what I've done now, and I'm like, oh, it's just so much more interesting. But then now I'm like, well, do I want to do more of a fantasy sci-fi blend? Like again, it's just
Yeah.
now at this point reading, I'm like, okay, I'm like, I'll still read it if it's a typical, I don't want to say typical, but like your
Yeah. Yeah.
traditional, fantasy or
Yes.
sci-fi.
Yeah.
But I found recently like books like yours though have kept me far more engaged. Like Will White's like Cradle series, taking that again, fantasy and sci-fi and mixing it in where you have those elements. Like I'm tearing through them. So I just feel like personally I'm the type of reader now who I've read so many fantasy and sci-fi books. I need the blending and I need a unique idea. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to get to it later and read a book like yours first. So
Because there's like a degree of you don't know to expect. You don't know
yes,
where it's gonna go, because with a whole bunch of different genres, you're like, okay, I know like the setup. I know that the hero is gonna find something really cool and that's gonna help him on his journey. You know what I mean? But you want to see that from a different angle. And like for myths and legends, we don't have to necessarily leave them in the past. We can like take them, run with them, give it a totally different angle, and reinvigorate it, right? And I know that there's like huge discourse. I think it was like almost last year, where people were talking about different angles on this legends,
yeah,
right? And they're all saying, well, it's overdone, it's done now. And I'm like, there's so many different ways that you can take it. And the reason why we love Miss Legends is because it connects us on a totally different degree, right? It's
yeah,
like almost everyone in the world knows some part of Arthurian legend,
yeah,
right? Or knows some part of dragon mythology, for example, like, which is exactly why I took it. Like the more research I did, the more I'm sitting there going, this is so cool. Like I'm not even writing it. History is writing it itself, right? The
yeah,
connections and how, one culture across the globe can link to another so distinctly. And I'm like, this is really, really cool. So like at that point, why would I leave that in the past? This is something that's
yeah,
totally worth exploring and sharing with the new generation, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I could talk about this for
No, yeah,
hours.
yeah, yeah. Well, like I
I
said,
love this stuff.
well, like you said, Morgan Le Fay, and like there was somebody recently. I'm gonna feel so bad, but I was just watching like a TV show, and I think it was older, but like they had taken Morgan Le Fay, and just had. I can't believe I can't remember where I was watching, but yeah, they had taken her and updated her character a lot and made her more of a, like more of an actual person, kind of like what they did with the TV show Merlin. Like I felt like they actually made her
Mm,
a, you actually got to see where she came from, and she wasn't just some outrageous villain. But yeah, I definitely agree with you with
exactly.
her. Like
Yeah.
she's very interesting, and I think with characterization, like out of anybody, she's the most interesting, and like I feel like Arthur's
because
great
there's
and
so
all.
many questions around her, right? Like you
Yeah,
just
yeah,
don't know. And again, you don't know what to expect.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
she going to be a hero at this point, or is she going to be a villain? It like she's so morally gray, and I
yeah,
absolutely love that. And that's what I really, really focused on. Like it wasn't necessarily how her future fits in with my character, with the one that I'm querying, which is a motley fool. But for that, it's like, well, why did she make those choices? What brought her to that point where she
yeah,
felt like she was ostracized and isolated and became this massively powerful being, and yet at the same time always thrown to the side, and it's like, well, how did we get there?
yeah, yeah.
So, and my inspiration was actually from the Magic Treehouse books back from
Oh
when I was a
man,
kid.
I love
She
those.
played a huge role in it, and she was always my favorite character. Like every time she came in, I'm like, oh, the kids are in for it now. You know
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I mean? And it was such a simple nod to it that I'm like, where are the books about her? Like
yeah, yeah,
even if it's vague, which in a way mine kind of is, kind of isn't, because it draws on a lot of other myths, like in France as well. But it's just like, where is she? Where is
yeah.
she in history? Let's talk
No,
about
yeah,
her.
yeah,
And I think that there's so many opportunities to do that in like every culture, right? And to
yeah.
bring that forward, right? So like my next book that I'm planning is to do some kind of urban fantasy twist, but from the Chinese angle. So
Oh,
from
that's
Chinese
cool.
lore and stuff like that. Still working it out, but at the same time, it's something that like I grew up with, right? So
Yeah,
it's something that's very close to my heart, and I want to share it with the world. So
yeah, yeah,
that's kind of what you always got to focus on, right? And I like what your friend said, like, would you read this, right?
yeah,
It's always the question that you have to ask yourself. Like,
yeah,
you are the audience, and then from there you consider everybody else, right? So
yeah.
yeah,
That's why I really liked
because we're
Kelly McCullough's books, the Fallen Blade series. Like he took Asian culture and created these amazing kingdoms and mixed Fae in with those types of legends. Kind of took like a different take on Fae and elves things. But I mean, it was just like
mhm.
it's a brilliant world. They have like amazing, like one of the water dragons in it is one of the coolest. Like I don't know. He just had so many great things. I was like, oh, I just love this. I was like, I told him in our interview, I was like, not enough people, like I love Asian culture. And like I just feel
Mhm.
like history too, like especially with where I grew up in the Midwest, it's like you don't learn about that nearly enough. I'm a history teacher, and it's like I want to teach about that with world history because those kind of things get glossed over.
Yeah,
Like I've
exactly.
taken Taekwondo for years. I'm huge into martial arts, and I love the culture, the history. And I mean, Tokugawa period's like my favorite time period, just in terms of that part of the world. And I even just
Yeah.
expand. But yeah, it's just like it's just cool, and I like to see people expand because again, I'm kind of over the same old. But yeah,
Exactly. And the thing is, like, even if it's so different, there's so many ways that you can still connect with it.
yeah, yeah.
Right. I know like there was this huge argument recently about Turning Red, the new Pixar movie
Oh
that's
yeah,
featuring a Chinese Canadian,
my
which is
God,
freaking awesome. But people
yeah,
were
it
like,
looks
I can't
so
relate to
good.
this. And I'm like, have you been through puberty? Because if you
Yeah,
have, then you can relate to
yeah,
it,
yeah.
because that's the entire point. But
But you could
like, I
relate
guess
to a
like
toy though. You could relate to a bunch of toys.
exactly.
I don't understand.
Cars, like
Cars,
a
yep,
rat that
a
can
rat,
cook, that's okay. Okay, sure, but I
pirate,
get in the end
whatever.
it's to each their own, but at the same time, like even the concept of filial piety, like that's huge, right? Like the kuchi aspect in Chinese culture. But the thing is that that same degree of necessity for respect is pervasive in so many cultures, and a lot of even Western families grew up with that same kind of household and upbringing and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
I feel like no matter what, there's always ways you can connect with it. It's
yeah,
whether
yeah,
you like cartoons or not at
yeah,
that point,
yeah.
right?
But
Look at the bigger picture, sir.
yeah,
Is it just because
but
you don't like Pixar movies?
I kind
So
of, I had a. We talk a lot about this in my history class. I feel it's important that looking at history, and I guess this is why I don't like to write about those things because it's real life, and some things I like. I want to expand on different ideas, but I just feel like you can look at any history book and see that a white man wants to keep his power and be in charge. And one of my girls like brought that up. She's like, "Yeah, did you hear about this?" Because we talk about current events a lot. And I was like, "I did." She goes, "Yeah, just an example of another white man trying to keep his power." And my co-teacher looked at me, and we were both just like, "Did it, bro?" Like,
that's yeah, like slow clap. That's
yep,
where it
yep,
is.
yep. And
you know.
we were just like, wow, like that's it. And we didn't even really, I didn't even connect it. I was just upset because I'm like, it's a cartoon. I feel like, again, you have toys, pirates, cars. You can connect with those people, but again, not a kid, going through puberty or these changes.
Just in a different culture. Like,
I thought it looked hilarious. Like, I'm
oh,
excited to
like
take my nephew.
absolutely.
Like, like I know this could be
Yeah.
his next. He loves Ron's Gone Wrong, and he always calls it Ron's All Gone.
Oh, that's
But I know
good.
that's gonna be like his next one because he loves to pretend,
Yeah.
and just the red panda just in general. I mean,
Oh, it's
it's just
perfect, right?
I think it's cool because
And
again,
they're
you're
so
taking
cute.
mythology. Yeah, you're taking mythology and you're adding it. I mean, I don't know. It's the same thing they said with Coco, and then that became like,
And it was
huge
amazing. It
Encanto.
was so
Yeah.
amazing.
So
Exactly, exactly. And there's so many ways that you can relate to it, whether it's one character on the side or the main character,
yeah,
you can
yeah,
find your place in it for sure. So
yeah. No,
yeah,
totally.
oh, I
Yeah, I'm
love it.
excited for that one. I told my
Yeah,
family,
me too.
I was like,
I
don't
have it
take
queued
him.
up, so
Yeah. I'm ready to
yeah.
go. So I just wanted for the audience, because I've looked at your blurb quite a bit and reviews and things, but what is your book of Us and Them about?
All right. So there's so many different angles to this, but I guess the main one is you follow 17-year-old Everin. And she lives a very sheltered life, very nomadic, from international school to international school. But the reason why she's so kept, guarded is because she's one of the 12 vessels for the Leviathans. And the Leviathans are these dragon aliens. So a la Ed McCaffrey, and it's super cool, and you just don't know what it is. But the entire education and what she grew up with is myths, legends, cultures across the globe, and how Leviathans basically influence Earth. So they come in, they visit, and they adapt history and change it for the better or worse, or create strife to promote human evolution. So that is their aim. So they come on Earth, they take this form, and because the humans back then can't necessarily visualize aliens, they take what they know, horse, serpent, there's stag even at that point too, and they explain it in some way, shape, or form, which has created the imagery of dragons. So the reason why all these cultures throughout the globe have it is because the Leviathans have entered Earth to influence history, to
Mm,
push evolution to its apex. So these 12 vessels are they're known as paladins, which is also again bringing in a little bit of mythology and legend there. But basically they are raised to become vessels for these species because they've reached the apex form of human evolution. So all 12 of these paladins are mixed race, multiracial. They got their genes, fully melded and creating this new breed of human
mm.
at that point. And because of that, they have a little bit more special strength, special hearing, and so on and so forth. And they have their chosen weapon. So this entire time, she's being raised in this small, sheltered, guarded community of her own with her mother. And her mother is the leader of the organization that has hidden the Leviathans in our world history. So
Okay.
they've always adapted throughout time to make sure that it's nothing scary, it's no alien influence, it's purely just dragons on Earth,
Oh,
right?
that's cool.
So she's dreaming about joining it. She finally ends up joining it, and the problem is that somebody is hunting the paladins down. They find one who's been murdered, and they have to figure out what's going on, because if they don't have all 12, or if they don't have enough, or if they don't please, the Leviathans will not come back down to Earth and bring human evolution to its next stage. So there's a lot of pressure, a lot of high stakes. It's a murder mystery, a science fantasy, all wrapped into one. But I do put in a lot of myths and legends. And like I said, history kind of wrote it itself. The more research I did, the more I'm like, oh, okay, this is fantastic. This fits perfectly, with my storyline, almost convincing me that maybe this is the truth, right? and those are the books that I've always loved, is where you read and you go, well, why can't this be possible?
Yeah.
Why can't this be real? That's really, really fascinating to me. So that's pretty much the concept. And you're spun on this murder mystery, and you don't know who to trust, and she doesn't either, because she's in this entire society that's built on deceit. They purposely hide everything in history.
Oh,
So how can you trust anyone there?
mm.
Right. So it adds a little bit of a different angle. So yeah,
Oh, that's
that's book
cool.
one.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I just love, like,
Thank you.
you made a really good point, and I like how you went with this. I know. I mean, just like thinking back to the times where I've read different mythology within Asian cultures where dragons have, particularly Asian culture. I feel like from what I've read in mythology, like they do help a lot, right? Like they're guardians, you know, they pass on knowledge, you know. So I liked how you took that concept. To me, that just makes total sense with, you know, the different things that I've read, and some of the things that like I've enjoyed the most, you know, in terms of mythology with dragons, like especially like I feel like water dragons for me in particular are the coolest. Like, but yeah, like
Oh my goodness.
I like how you did that
Especially
though.
Japanese water dragons are just like,
Yes.
oh my
Yes.
gosh, so complex,
Yep.
right? But that was the entire point. So I actually split it into two, which is Western and Eastern ideologies of these leviathans or
Oh, that's
dragons
cool.
from that perspective. And like, why is it that as they grow more to the west that they lose toes? So in mythology, they go from 5 fingers to 4
Yeah,
fingers
yeah,
to
yeah.
3 fingers, you know? And like there's so much of this common knowledge, and I obviously bring in like serpents, you know, even from there, like the world serpent, you know, who wraps itself around Midgard, you know. So I obviously bring a lot of that into it, and that's where like the imagery of the, oh, I guess you can't really see the Ouroboros there,
There you
right,
go.
of the dragon eating its tail.
Oh,
That's the
that's cool.
mark on the back of her neck, and that's what's, she has to wait until it conjoins in order to evolve and become part of the
Oh,
secret
that's
society.
cool.
So that imagery really plays a huge important part throughout the entire series, because it's beginning meets end. Like, where is your role in this cyclical universe, you know? So it's kind of taking all these mythologies and wrapping it into my own, whether you want to call it ideology, religion, cultural, it can be anything really. So yeah, that's what made me so excited. I can nerd out about this for a long time, but you're totally right with the wisdom and knowledge, and like the pearl of wisdom, pearl of knowledge. They always, you know, you always see the dragons with the ball, right? And sometimes they have haunches. Like in Turkish culture, the dragons that they have actually look more like horses or like griffins in a way, right? They've got those massive wings, but they take on a little bit of a form, and it's very common to the Welsh dragon form physiology as well, right? So there's so many ways that connects, and you're like, how did they connect, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of stuck in my own answer to that. Yeah.
I think some of you guys just got bumped on my TBR. Hashtag not sorry. So it's just funny
because it's so hard to
Yeah.
keep it to such a short, you know, like it's for me,
No,
like I
totally.
could have written about this for like 140,000 words, you know,
Oh,
but
yeah.
to create it into like the YA acceptable, you know, word count, it was really hard, and there's so much more I want to expand on, which is why it's book one.
Yeah.
You know,
So
so
I guess
yeah.
that, well, I can't remember if I asked this. I mean, I might have asked it later. Trying to make sure I don't mess up our order here. Yeah, that just, I don't know, to me that just sounds awesome. Like, especially with the tattoo, like even like there's some ideas where I'm just like, okay, that's awesome. Like like I don't want to, never mind, I won't ruin it for, there's one thing that Batman does where it's so simple of world building where I'm like, yeah, I almost asked that question too early. But there's something so simple that he does in terms of world building that I was like, that I like looked around the theater. I was like, did nobody else just see that?
Did you catch that?
Yeah, I was like, that was so simple, but so cool. And that for the tattoo, like that too is like one of those things for me where I'm like, oh, that is really like, I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Like, that's awesome. That's super cool.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, like when Wheel of Time came out with that image too, I was like, whoa, that's really cool, you know. Don't steal my idea, but at the same time, I want to watch it, you know.
No, like the
does.
Heron
I
Mark's
mean, it's been
Blade.
written forever, so
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, like I love
so
the
there's so
Heron
many
Mark's
different
Blade.
ways to interpret. Yeah.
There's just cool things like that. You're just like, you just geek out. You're like, that's just cool. Like,
Yeah. And that's the thing, like whether it's books that came before us, books that will come after us, you know, it's the interpretation of all these different, you know, worlds, right? And images and stuff that makes it so unique, because in the end, that's what everything's subjected to. It's human subjectivity. How did we understand it, right? The pyramids of Giza, do we think they're actually built by aliens or not? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many ways, but there's so many ways to interpret it, right? So it's kind of just giving that answer to something that we likely will never know. So
Well, speaking of P.L. Stewart, like him and I were discussing, I can't remember if it was during our interview or before we started recording. I just enjoyed our conversation. I just forgot, but like I'm one of those historians. Like I feel like I've just seen so many things where it's like I feel like there had to be some sort of civilization, like ancient civilization before. You know, and now it's like there's so many things that just popped up within the last 2 weeks that people have found. You know, and that's what I said to my friend. He goes, "You're so stuck in mythology," and I'm like, how could you not
because
be
it's
such
still
a
growing.
yeah, I'm like, we
Yeah.
literally find out all these cities, like, oh, not Mohenjo-daro, but there's that other one, that they thought was just, in the Bhagavad Gita, and
Yes,
and
yes,
like,
yeah.
I'm like, well, what's to stop us? I'm like, who's to say that somebody hasn't already discovered a vinyasa, and like just kept it for themselves, because it's going to be more advanced than anything we
Exactly.
have. And, again, like I had a friend who did that for a short story, and there's allegedly this rumor that the U.S. troops in India, actually, like in Cambodia, found a vinyasa and then like unearthed it. So I've heard that, like, there were a lot of really
Wow.
interesting stories about it. And I was just like, this, the fantasy and science fiction and the historian in me was like, oh my gosh, like that'd be amazing. And I was like, that'd be so like our government here in the United States to hide that, and studying it.
Yeah,
So my
exactly.
friend wrote a short story about it, and it was so like, it was years
Oh, that's
ago, but it was
awesome.
so cool, And I said to my other friend, I was like, how can you not like think of something like that, even with a rumor, and just like your mind just go, like mine goes a
Exactly,
mile a minute.
exactly.
Like, yeah, I just feel like
Yeah,
there's so much there.
so true.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we kind of went over where did you come up with this idea for book one, but is there anything that you kind of want to add to that process, or?
Yeah, so again, that question was always the big one. So it
Mm.
actually came from a docu-fiction
Oh, that's
way back
cool.
when I was in April. It was on April 1st, which as a kid, I didn't really realize it was, April Fool's Day. But I think it was, I don't know if it was Nat Geo or another, Planet. I think it was on Planet, Animal Planet. And it was about dragons and how they found this body of a dragon and it was real and they found the bones and it explained, all these bones being found throughout the world. I was so engrossed in it. I was so excited. I'm like, Dad, dragons are real. And my dad's just like chuckling behind his hand, going like, it's an April Fool's joke, right? It was a docu fiction. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means, right? But as a kid, it was like my dream came true. You know what I mean? That feeling
Oh
when you're
yeah.
like, oh, it's real. It can be
Yeah.
real. So I've always thought about that for like years and years. And that's why like I loved Anne McCaffrey's take on dragons and how they
Mm.
came from like an alien world, right? So like I don't necessarily take it from that perspective because these dragons are more, I guess, humanoid of nature, in that sense, which will be explained later on. But yeah, like it was just so fascinating to me that you could take something that we think we know and give a different history on it, different spin on it, right? Which we've already discussed. So it was actually, so I work a lot of shift work. So at the time I was working the midnight shift. And with that, there's a lot of lonely driving. You're driving with your own thoughts, you're
Yeah.
overexhausted, your brain is just a pile of mush. And yet usually those are the times where my brain finally comes up with like the weirdest yet coolest concepts. And I'm like, I love that. I need to put it in my notes. You know what I mean? And so it was a drive home, which is I think like 35 minutes. And I wrote the outline for the first book in my head. I was
Oh
like,
wow.
I can answer it like this. Why have I never thought of this before? And I think it really largely plays from P.L. Stewart publishing his book because finally it was like, oh, I could write a novel. Why couldn't I? Like everyone seems like it always sounds like this huge, far-fetched idea, like to
Yeah.
become a published author, right? Especially with independent publishers and people self-publishing now, like it makes it so much more real to do. So when I was driving, I was like, well, why can't I? And then I was like, oh, I'll try it out. And then I thought about it, and then I was like, well, why can't they be dragon aliens? Why can't it be because of human evolution? What if I make it a girl? And at the time, I was super into murder mysteries, like horrifyingly into it. Watching all of those series. Stephanie L. Perkins, she wrote one for a YA audience, and I was like, that's really cool. I didn't know you could make it so not gruesome necessarily, but something so vivid
Yeah. Yeah.
for a young adult audience. And I was like, oh, like I guess that's changed too, because as a kid, young adult it was more middle grade,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
sense, where it was super clean cut, no references to this, So I was like, okay, if that's possible, why can't I? Right. So yeah, it was along that drive home, created it all, typed it furiously once I parked in my driveway. I think I stayed in my driveway for like an hour and I was just typing it out. And yeah, that's pretty much where it came from. And then after that, it was just lots of research and full dedicating. But I wrote it so fast because I was like, I knew that this was something I just needed to get onto paper. After that, it went through like crazy amount of edits,
Yeah.
but writing that first draft was easy. And that's something that I'm now using as kind of a gauge for my next books is it easy to write or is it not? Is it a chore or is it not? Right. And it's exactly what you're saying. There's something, whether it's the characters or the background story, like if something doesn't jive, give it a break and you'll come up with a different angle down the road, right? Or different characters or something that'll pivotally change it. So yeah, so basically once I was on that road, there's no stopping me. So I was really excited.
That's awesome. I want to show this to my neighbors and be like, see, I'm not the only one that does this in my driveway late at night.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, people must think I'm so weird, coming back at like 7 a.m., in like dark sweats and stuff like that. And I'm sitting in my driveway. I probably look very suspicious, but that's okay.
We just need signs.
I live here.
Yeah. Like particular license plates, like I am a writer, like I'm an author, like that way.
Exactly.
Because that's like what
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, it's like what my friend was saying about Google searches. He's like, I hope nobody at the NSA is.
We need a caveat button that says, I'm a writer. So sorry. I'm not planning any attacks. I'm not planning anything. Please no. Oh my goodness. I like really catch you.
For like sci-fi, like it had some terrorist stuff going on, like with different human and alien species. And so I was like looking up things, and my friend goes, my best friend, I was talking about, he goes, you might want to be careful what you're looking up. And I was like, I said, that's so true. He goes, the Men in Black or whoever's going to be like, CIA's going to be like on your doorstep, like, why are you researching all these terrorist things? And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll save that for later when people actually know who I am.
Exactly. Yeah.
NSA
so there's more sources elsewhere saying that I'm an author besides myself. Yeah.
Absolutely, exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like an NSA agent's like reading a book of mine, and like, no, like one of the guys, it's like on lunch is reading my book. He's like, no, that guy's cool. He's an author.
He's good. Yeah, you got that clearance, right?
Yeah.
But I know, like my most recent book that I'm writing, I had to research how to kill somebody with a spoon. Guess what? I am not the only person who's researched that. Okay. And that is when there's a problem with society, right? But I was like, how do I phrase this in Google? And you know what? Not the first one.
That's really funny.
So stay tuned, because that'll be in one of my subsequent
books. Awesome.
Yeah.
Funny, because I just know somebody else that did that the other day and was talking about it on a podcast. So you're the second person I've heard, and second writer I've heard in like literally like 6 days.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's
really
amazing.
Awesome. Now everybody's gonna go and go do that.
Research it. Yeah, exactly.
Cops are gonna be real busy this week.
Yeah. Poor guys.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I feel like I do that a lot in my driveway. I just like, especially like there's snow right now, like we're getting all this snow, and I don't know why shoveling in me, like I just start thinking about, podcasts and things that I've listened to, or I'll think about this interview later, and all of a sudden it's like, ideas pop into my head, and I'm like, I hate snow, but I do my best work after shoveling. So
yeah,
my wife,
because you're exhausted.
Yeah.
You don't have that like self-imposed filter, right? Because you're like, so often you're like, oh, that's a stupid idea. Oh no, why would I explore that? It's like, well, no, those are the exact ideas you should explore.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's a really good idea. Yeah. That's a good point. I actually never considered it that way, but yeah, that's awesome. I feel like we talked quite a bit, but just to double check to make sure we didn't miss anything, for how did you go about combining elements of fantasy and sci-fi for this novel? Did you you talked about Ian McCaffrey, and things like that, mythology and things, but was there anything in particular that you did with your outline or your research? I find a lot of times, and I found this with people too that want to do a niche, fantasy or sci-fi, that for me, like, it is very hard sometimes to do research because there is a lot of mythology out there. So I was kind of curious at how you decided on, the mythology for your dragons, or things like that. Like, is there any insight you can give us into how you went about that for your world building or characterization?
Yeah, I think, like, as a kid, I grew up with fantasy so much, and I love sci-fi. I absolutely love sci-fi. But sci-fi, there's always an angle of there's no strict rules. You know what I mean? I find that there's very often, unless you're, in space and there's a lot of rules, you need to scientifically abide by. We're looking at you, Star Wars, and your sound effects. But, there's usually not that many rules because it's something that's extremely unexplored, right? So for me, the focus was definitely looking at fantasy aspects of it, especially because I was drawing on myths and legends and making sure accuracy was there. However, the spin on doing the sci-fi I found came more naturally
Mm.
because you're creating new things, right? So in my book, there's this living metal. It's an organic
Oh,
metal called
that's cool.
zirconium. Yeah, so it's called Draconum, and it plays a massive part in building this. So, and like everyone's attachment towards it. So, it basically hums and sings at a resonance that hums and sings with the paladins, and that's where they
Oh, that's
know that they're
cool.
chosen. It doesn't affect anyone else, but it sings from their heart, soul, whatever, mind, body, matter, particles, atoms, whatever you want to call it. They resonate, and so I really wanted to focus on those aspects, but those things the science fiction aspects were very very natural to me. It was much more like, how do I explain how do they get here, you know what I mean, or how do I explain the portals, or how do I explain all of that. It was a much more easier explanation. So I feel like the more regimented structured part was the fantasy aspect, because I was drawing on myths and legends, right? If you're not, I mean, it's awesome because you can create any creature you want, right?
Yeah.
Very similar to science fiction as well, but from the fantasy that I was drawing on, the paladins and, you know, the symbols and the history and the education that they went through, the words, the terminology, that was all much more structured. So for me, like when I created the outline, that was the focus. Where can I introduce this? Where do I introduce that without overloading the reader? And that was something that was difficult for me, because for me, like, I love legends and stories. So there is one reference to a legend, and it's at the very beginning. And I was always so worried. I'm like, is this too much world building? And I'm sure for some people it may be, but for people who I know were like me, it's something that, like, I need that to set my brain so that the
Yeah.
rest of the book I can think of it with that framework, right? Especially because I'm introducing something that seems so, I guess, bizarre to some people, right? It doesn't fit in the definition that we have as dragons in our head, right? So yeah, it was definitely difficult, I would say, to combine the elements in some frames, but really, like, I focused on science fiction as being the playful side of it. So that definitely kind of changed a little bit too, because this is set in the future. It's set where climate change has basically destroyed our world. Humans have destroyed our world. You know, the air isn't as breathable, so a lot of people are staying in their homes and stuff. And like the secret society is on a mountain in the Rocky Mountains, Canadian Rocky Mountains. So at that, you know, altitude, it's a lot better actually, in terms of, because humans haven't touched it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a whole bunch of different angles to consider, but playful aspect was science fiction for sure in this book, which I know for a lot of other people it's not. It can be
Yeah.
the complete opposite. So I guess to sum that up, I mean, it depends on the book that you're
Yeah.
writing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
No, totally.
And what your focus is on. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I just know, like, I
long
know
wind.
people. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying it was a long-winded answer for for
Oh,
something
no, no,
straightforward.
no. Well, you got me thinking. That's why I like doing this podcast. Gets me thinking about some different things. And well, yeah, I like how you talked about, like, going from one side and then letting the other side, in terms of fantasy and sci-fi, kind of like let one lead. I think that's a lot of the issue I've had personally trying to do it, is like trying to go down the middle, I guess you could say, or maybe I don't think I've done that. So I think I need to try to,
Yeah.
try that more. I feel like fantasy comes to me a lot easier. So maybe taking more fantasy, and then um like I really liked reading about your book, because I was like, oh, I really want to see how she does this, because like I want to take my fantasy world and then at some point make my sci-fi just like do what Brandon Sanderson kind of did, but like even more so, like do like 1,000 years after my original books were set in the same fantasy world. So
Oh,
then the
awesome.
technology's there.
That is
So
awesome.
you do have like it's more like a Warhammer type of thing, just not
Hmm.
as much technology. But you have
Yeah,
your paladins, you have your clerics, things like that.
that's awesome. That is
But
so awesome.
I think that's great advice though, is just saying, what you did is just let one kind of take the reins, and then or build a foundation and then let the other one kind of fill in. I think that makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah, and it was very hard to find people that were, even though sci-fi and fantasy are usually come hand in hand, right? It's always sci-fi fantasy, right? When it came to agents, when it came to finding my genre, I was like, wow, it's a lot more divided than I thought it would be, right? So finding that middle place in between, there was a lot of limited resources where I could really use them as comparison books or use them as books that like I've read in the past that I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. I haven't really, you know, and
Yeah.
McCaffrey touched on the science fiction aspect very, very lightly, right? In that sense. And you know, or you get the complete opposite where it's just pure sci-fi, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting to see that because I know they exist. I know that they're out there, but a lot of them I know are more newer authors, right?
Yeah.
So it was really exciting to like try to see where that could fit in. Like I know there was one what's it called? Once in Future something, but it was a YA science fantasy. They drew on Arthurian legend, but they set it in space, right? So they went full science angle with a
Okay.
touch of fantasy in it, right?
Huh.
Whereas mine is Earth based, but a touch of science fiction in the sense that it's aliens coming to Earth and having that like kind of like Arrival,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
very much you know that movie, yeah. So it's kind of that angle for
Oh,
sure.
what a
So
that's
yeah,
a great movie.
it's awesome. Yeah. So it's basically like the end of that.
Oh, that's
You know,
cool.
the whole reveal where they're actually there to help humans. That was what I was like, yes, yes, I want that because there's so many times where aliens are like vilified,
Yeah.
right? And you're like, no, no, I want them to play a different role. I want
Yeah. Yeah.
them to see it, right? And then also not knowing where that may lie, right? So you have your morally great characters. You have your, are they a villain? Are they a hero? Maybe they're both. You know, I feel like a lot of my books are always focusing on, well, what if they're both? You
Yeah.
know, because to some they can be interpreted as disasters, right? Like why would you come to Earth to influence human history when it's human history? It should be based on humans. And then versus the other side to it, right? Are you actually here to help us? Are you our
Yeah.
saviors? Are you our gods at that point? You know, like is this a new sense of theology? So yeah, no, definitely different angles.
Yeah, that's cool. I know like one guy I talked to, he had like like we were watching a lot of like I love UFOs and aliens and stuff. So I watch a lot of stuff and we were watching one documentary and somebody had posed a question that said, well, if aliens meant us harm on a whole scale, like why aren't we enslaved already? Like essentially.
Or
Like
destroyed, yeah.
or destroyed. Yeah, like why wouldn't you just why
Right.
would you well like it's the same thing, right? It's like Avatar. Like why wouldn't you just come if you have more technology and just take all of our stuff? And to me,
Yeah.
like I was like, oh, that's a good question. And then he came back to me later, he goes, yeah, so I did this thing. And he goes, I'll tell you when it's done. I'm like, so what'd you do? And he goes, I took it and ran with that question. I guess essentially like he's writing like why like we're being protected by a group of aliens or like an alien race versus all the other ones
Yeah.
who do to us harm. And it's basically about like their kind of like essentially like their police force which protects our planet. And I was like, that is such a cool idea.
Okay. I
Yeah, I was
love
like, that's
that.
yeah, I was like, that's really neat. So I know he's like working away on that. So I was like, that's a really cool concept. It's like more in
What's
depth than that, but
that animated show that not Invincible? Oh my god, it's so good. It was so good. Came out super gory. It's about a boy and his dad's a superhero.
isn't that Invincible? I thought that was
Yeah, I thought it
Invincible.
was Invincible or something like one of
I
those
have the
words.
comic. I have the first
Yeah,
graphic
the
novel
comic.
of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
But there
it was
was that
good.
that pseudo police force, and the guy visits, and he's like, "Oh, I'm supposed to take care of Earth a little bit," you know. But it was so
Yeah,
subtle, and I'm like, "That's really cool." Like, I'm so
yeah,
glad that your friend's writing that because, like, to have something purely dedicated, oh, that'd be
yeah,
really
yeah.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
because it
that's
was the
cool.
same as like when you're talking about the Roman Legion that went missing. I watched a documentary about that, and they mentioned it so briefly, and I'm like, I'm sorry, sir. Can you go back and make an entire show about this? Because why are you like, oh, and then they went missing, ta-da, and then they like leave it, and then
Top
that's it. There's
three.
no reference,
Yeah, top
and
three,
I'm
by the
like,
way. Top three
come
legions.
on.
Top three most experienced legion of all time, right? Top three disappeared. 5,000
Like
men
what?
disappeared without a trace. No one's ever found a shield. No one's ever found a spear. No one's ever found, a helmet. Like no, like 5,000
Yeah,
bodies just disappear. Like, and then
especially
now,
that day and age, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And like now, because like they like so I'm like doing a lot of research. So I found evidence where, like they like were obviously having trouble with because they were almost destroyed by Boudica, like Queen Boudica, I think it's like I'm probably misquoting, but I think it's about 45 years before they disappear. So they basically disappear. It's like 108 like AD. So there's like 114 or something like that, or 124. There is mention of them either in Hispania or Gaul, but they think now, like I read one thing where it's a clerical error. They just moved out of there. And I'm like, but Hadrian
Huh.
goes back to the wall
Yeah.
after they disappeared allegedly. And I'm like, why on earth would he go back then? And then later on they have to pull out
Yeah.
really quick after that. And I'm like, doesn't make any
It's
sense.
so
Like,
cool. It's
yeah,
so cool.
yeah,
And like that's the thing. Like it's like these massively fascinating things, and yet they're so swept under the rug because there's no answer for it,
yep,
right? And it's like, well, no, I wanna take it out from under the rug,
yep,
dust it off and see where it can
totally.
go, right?
Yeah.
So
And that's
no,
where I
I
just
love
thought,
that.
well, I might even start. I was thinking about doing this as like starting with archaeologists that like somebody in a field, right? Like a farm field or whatever, or depending on where I want to like put their location. I've been they were lost somewhere in like these forests, like north, like east of their fort, more like towards like totally blanking out, like the picks. So I
Hmm.
thought, well, what I maybe could do is like have it open up instead of with them in their time is like open up into present day and have somebody discover them and
Oh,
they discovered like, you know, like one of the crafts
yeah,
was
yeah,
open,
yeah.
and then that's the prologue, and then they're like, well, why aren't there any like bodies or whatever, and then have that be, you know, like you only find a few things, and then the story cuts in, and then later on you find out that the zombies actually eat the entire thing. So that's why,
That's
you know,
awesome. That's so cool.
yeah,
Such
but I
a
was like,
fun spin. I love that.
yeah,
That's
I'm like,
awesome.
I just, my friend did such a cool thing like yours, like Jay and Jay and Dotson was another one, like just doing cool stuff, and I was like, oh, it's like I really like that's like Dirk Ashton too, like him and I talked, like I think there should be a whole different genre called mythological fantasy, um, because like that's
Absolutely.
what Dirk's is, and my friend,
Yeah.
you know, she wrote something similar, and I'm like, well, that's really what I like to do with urban fantasy. Is like really, it's not really urban fantasy a lot of the times, you know, it's mythological fantasy, and I think whether or
Yes,
not it's,
exactly.
you know, it's urban or historical fantasy, it's like it's still,
Yeah,
you know, I just think there needs to be a mythological fantasy. I told Dirk him and I are going to start it together.
absolutely. Yes, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
And then
That's
you could do
awesome.
like mythological sci-fi or something like that, because then I think it adds
Yeah,
a whole element to
exactly.
it. Yeah, it'd be
That'd be
cool.
so much fun. I
Yeah,
love
yeah, yeah.
that.
So I'm actually really curious for that fifth question. How did you land on YA for your audience?
They always say write what you know, right? And I always read YA. I mean, the only time, so I started reading when I was super, super young, but I was introduced to quite mature books really quickly because my
Mhm.
dad loves to read. Like he always had like these an entire library in the basement, right? So I'd always go down there and go, okay, can I read this? And my dad would be like, no, not yet. You know what I mean? But yeah, so like I went from Magic Tree House, like super, super middle grade, and I jumped straight to adult. So I guess in that sense. And then there were some books like Piers Anthony's Zank series. That was something that I absolutely loved. I love the adventure aspect. I mean, it has not aged well whatsoever. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of,
yeah. A,
sexist
a lot of
undertones or
his
whatever.
stuff, yeah, has not
It
aged
wasn't quite
very
great.
well.
But the adventure aspect was like so fascinating to me. But then ever since I went to adult, I just read YA because it was right where, even at 10, 11, I started reading, young adult novels. And like I said, it's really evolved over time. And now they're dealing with much more serious subject matter, and which is important because as a kid growing up, I wanted to be introduced to death. I wanted to be introduced to those different concepts because that's exactly when you're experiencing it and it's scary. So you want it to not be scary, right? So even my book, one of my buddies, he gave it to his kid, and his kid's 10, and I was like, are you, there's like murder in, like a lot of murder in it, and he goes, no, my kid reads like above his age, and like, again, I want to introduce like, death concepts to it. So after reading like just continuously young adult, I knew that that was kind of the realm that I wanted to exist in, right? So middle grade seemed a little bit too young for me, and it's I always loved the adult themes, but in a digestible format that can go to such a wide audience. And nowadays, young adult isn't just 13 to 17 or
Yeah,
13 to 19, depending on who you talk to,
yeah,
but adults read it, right? Like, I
yeah.
mean, here I am, almost 30, and I'm still devouring YA fiction. And I was like, it's a really special genre because it reaches so many different people, right? It's not too young for adults to read, but it's not too old for young kids to read if they're able to you know read those more serious
Yeah.
topics. So I felt like that was really, really important for me to make sure that it would reach a wide audience, especially when I involve multiracial characters, right? So for me as a kid, I never saw, I mean, representation in terms of Asian representation. never happened. You know,
Oh
I
yeah.
grew up with it a lot in Vancouver. I came over to Ottawa and it was non-existent. You know, in media, non-existent. We were always like the nerdy, you know, friends. But being a mixed kid, it kind of had this special angle where you don't quite fit in either boats, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm too white for my Asian crowd, too Asian for my white crowd. I actually lived in China for 3 years, and there I was viewed as white. You know, they touched my hair, which is curly, and they're going, "How is that possible?" They rubbed my tummy because it wasn't, you know, Asian skinny. You know what I mean? Like it was so different. But then when I tried to interact with both of those different communities back in Canada, where at the time there was not very many mixed kids. You know, I was probably one of three in my entire community. Um, there was so much of a loss of identity, you know, a loss of sense of belonging. And so for me, I really, really want to write books that can give you representation from no matter what walks of life, right?
Yeah.
That's so important to me. But also so that I can write books for people who never found themselves in any other books, right? So that's extremely crucial to me. And because of that, why it was perfect, because I could really touch the older kids who are also, you know, kids and adults now who were like me, the first of that generation of mixed kids, to the younger generation, which is massive. Like everywhere I look now, you know, there's mixed kids and multiracial
Yeah.
kids. And it's so exciting to me because now like our entire community is blending in color and religion and gender and everything. And I'm like, this is what I've been waiting for. You know, now's the time to be writing those books where that doesn't even play a part. You just see yourself in it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's definitely the angle where I wanted to, you know, I guess the platform that I wanted to take on. But that's exactly it. Like young adult has that far reaching capacity to be a supportive resource for the young, but also excitement for all of the above.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
That's awesome. I definitely agree with representation. Like that's where my stuff, I was like, it's just it doesn't work. And as a teacher, I'm like, I want one of my kids, all my kids, at some point, if they read them, because I do more, I'd say like Forgotten Realms type things. Like
Yeah.
I don't do like sex scenes or stuff like that. Like I might allude to some things. I don't really focus on romances too much. Like it's more of a, like political, ethical kind of struggle, so there's not really,
Hmm.
I would say, time for that, but I don't focus on that. But like I want them to always be able to pick up one of my books in the future and see themselves as the hero, whether or not
Exactly.
they're from whatever walk of life. Like to me, that's been like really, really important, especially with talking with different kids. Like I've taught a lot of kids from a lot of different countries, like refugees. Like I think the only place I have not taught a student from is Australia. Like that's about it.
Yeah, really, eh?
Like literally, like
Nice.
that's about it. So yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you. It's hearing some of the things that they have said to me, I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, so that's been like a mission for my own writing is to make sure that they can see themselves. And I got into it really heatedly with some Lord of the Rings fans recently with the Black Elf, and I'm
Yeah.
like, first of all, when I saw that trailer, I was like, this guy looks
This
awesome.
is
Like,
awesome.
yeah, I was like,
Yeah,
wow. Like,
exactly.
I was like, he looks so cool. I was like, he's probably one of the few, things in terms of television, like people, like characters in terms of television recently, where I'm like, I have to, like, I'm gonna eat up every single scene that character is in, and I'm like, I'm ready to go. And then
Yeah.
to hear people be like, well, that's not traditional. That's not Tolkien's world build. I'm like,
But
get
it's
out of here.
unrealistic, you
It is
know, that's the
unrealistic. Get out of
thing.
here.
Like,
Like,
I love Lord of the Rings. Like, I will die on every single hill. Like, I hope to gosh, there's never anything released, like, the whole, who
yeah. Yep.
situation with the
Yep.
HP series. And for
Yep.
me, like that, it destroyed me. And I'm like, well, that's it, like I'm in full support of the trans community. So there's no way in heck I'm ever gonna touch that. But
Yep.
Lord of the Rings, I'm always like, oh gosh, but I've always noticed, like even rewatching it, I rewatch it every year, extended versions, all in the same day. It's quite horrifying, but also fantastic. Usually on Thanksgiving, so that I'm cooking turkey at the same time. But I watch it every time. But then it was only recently, and I'm like, why does this seem so unrealistic to me? Like, why is it hitting different to me? And then I look, and I'm like, oh, I wow, did not realize that it's all Caucasian,
Yep. It's
and I'm
like
like,
shattered
how is that?
glass. Yep.
Yeah, and I was
It
like,
like ruined
that
it
is
for me
so
now. I was like,
bizarre.
well, because I argue with these guys and and there's all these, white guys on this particular. I just stopped following this group. I was like, I just do that on social media. Like, if you don't, like, I just feel like it's my social media. If you don't follow my views, like, that's like with friends too. I'm like, we can disagree on politics, but we can't disagree on those types of things, because those are kind of things
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
I believe those aren't politics, those are beliefs. And if I feel like you don't have the same beliefs as your friends, like then they're acquaintances, maybe.
That
But yeah,
exactly.
like
Yeah.
I got so
I
mad. I
know.
was like, what they said, I was like, listen, I said, well, you're talking, they're like, well, they did a great job with the movies. I said, but the movies were some of the most whitewashed times in the history of film. I'm like, you had
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
Gods of Egypt movie coming in, and all the dudes, basically, the most powerful, three most powerful guys were white
Exactly.
with Egyptian
They
gods.
weren't being hired. Nobody with
Yeah,
a
yeah.
person of color was being hired at the
Yep.
time. Now it's changed. Like the fact that it took this long for Shang-Chi to become popular, it's
What a
like,
great movie!
oh,
Oh my
but
god,
everyone loves
so
the
good,
movie. You know what
so
I mean?
good.
And it's funny because like I grew up with those Asian movies from like a very young age, right? Like Jackie Chan, like all that stuff.
Oh, I
Like
love
I
Jackie
watched that
Chan.
religiously. It was fantastic. And so when I came to Canada and realized that it wasn't popular necessarily here. I mean, like we had Rush Hour, but it wasn't quite there yet. And even then, it's like that was like a cult favorite. And like, why is it a cult favorite? It should be the world
Yeah,
favorite. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And you sit there and you're like, well, why can't it? So like for me, when I watched the new trailers, I was like, yeah, this is right. This feels much
yeah,
more normal to me. Like it feels like it fits.
yeah.
And I didn't even think about the fact that it might have the opposite, viewpoint, and people might come out of the woodwork with opposing views. And I was like, why? Like this is
Yeah.
freaking awesome.
I was like Wheel of Time. I'm like, what are you talking
Period,
about?
point, end of statement. Like it's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
cool. And the fact that, and like the fact that we get to dive back into that world, like again
Yep,
with a new angle,
yep,
why would you not want that? No
yep.
matter what shape or form, like this is so cool to me. And so like the representation is it's so important. And the thing is that it's becoming normalized now. And I'm so excited about that, because, it brings tears to my eyes, truly. Like when I watched Crazy Rich Asians, I
Oh, that's
bawled.
such a good movie.
I full out bawled in the movie
Such
theater
a
to the
good
point where
movie.
my friend was like, "Do you need to take a step outside?" And I'm half, and I always get, you're not Asian enough, you're not Asian enough. But no, I grew up with those songs. I grew up with those references. I grew up with that because that is my family, right? So when I'm watching, I'm bawling my eyes out, and my friend's just like, "Do you need to take a break?" And the only time that I've ever cried in a theater was Marley and Me. So you can
Oh,
definitely
geez.
see how important that played,
Yeah,
and the fact that like I'm witnessing that now closer to 30 versus kids who are getting exposed to that now, like that's so exciting, right?
yeah,
And even for your students, the fact that they're brave enough to ask those questions,
yeah,
to
yeah,
your teacher, like that means that's a huge kudos to you as a teacher because they're comfortable enough to say that. And
yeah,
they know that they're in an environment that it can be discussed,
yeah.
without fear. And that's so important, right? Because yeah, anyway, I mean, it's meaningful and it's
Oh,
so
yeah.
exciting.
Well, I just
So
think,
that's exactly it. Like, I
yeah,
mean, a lot of the fantasy books that I always identified were when they didn't describe the main character,
yeah, because you can
right?
put yourself in that character too. Yeah,
Because you get to just, yeah,
yep,
exactly, right? So
yeah,
no, it's a total different game changer now too, right? And it doesn't limit anyone in any way,
yeah,
to have that representation there.
yeah.
So I think that's just something that people need to keep in mind. It limits no one in any way.
Well, I'm like, no offense to anybody, but I'm like, if you really need a lack of representation, I'm like, there are so many books and movies out there for
Go
for
for those.
decades, for decades. Yeah, like
Yeah,
that's your genre. Go ahead,
exactly.
you guys go ahead. We're gonna
Exactly.
enjoy the evolution of actually being human and
Yeah.
enjoy seeing different people. And again, I think like I said, when my friend, I'm so glad he said that to me, because I was like, he goes, it's not your fault. He's like, you're a white man. He goes, you have a different perspective. And, now, but like in terms of, even just, being able to say that about my writing, I have a lot more, female characters. I had like, there's one in particular, I just love her. And I'm like, she's just so awesome. And I'm like, if he had not said that, like, I would not have created her, and it's like, I give him a lot of credit, for being a good enough
Hmm.
friend to be like, hey, like this is what's wrong with your writing. And, I
Yeah.
think especially like 6 years ago was particularly when, a lot of guys in the, fantasy and sci-fi community are like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Like, is this what we're trying to do?
Hmm.
But, it's almost
Hmm.
like I don't know how to explain it. Like, I felt like I had to take my helmet off, there's
Yeah.
almost like media I don't know. I do
It's a
feel like
rewiring. It's really a rewiring.
I do feel like part of it was on purpose, like part of it was on purpose. Because
Mhm.
again, like my student said, like, these people, and it's true, like, being a history teacher, I can tell you, like, it's definitely true. Like, they want to keep their power. And, I'm like, wow, as a kid, even reaches into media, like books, like seeing, like, I love David Eddings, I do, but, there's another one who, a lot of, you have Silk and a couple characters, of color that are good guys, but again, the majority of the evil people are, from like, Middle Eastern or, like African
Oh,
type
I know.
cultures.
And it's
And
so
it's like,
tiring. It's
yeah, and I'm
like,
like,
come
oh,
on.
yeah. I'm like, you have Pellagra and you have,
Yeah.
these other great female characters, which Tolkien didn't do. I go, but I got into it with these guys because I was like, I go, Tolkien did fight for colonialism. And I said, he has a lack of representation from his book because of that, those ideas.
Mhm.
I said, I don't think it's necessarily his fault, but I said, that was just an unheard
It
concept at that
exists.
time. Yeah, you have to understand.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the lack of women representation too. You have a couple female
Yes.
characters and
Yeah.
they do very little. I'm like, so what do
Yeah.
you want? I said, what do you want? You want also us to roll back, female characters as well, just so you can be happy. I said, you're not saying anything about the female characters in the movie.
Mhm.
Galadriel is going to have a much bigger part to play, and she has in the Hobbit movie, all of them. I'm like, so would you like us to actually go back to how Tolkien wrote them? I said, so is it
Yeah.
necessarily representation that you don't like, or is it something
Yeah.
else? And they don't want to hear
Well,
that.
even Peter Jackson's spin on everything, right? I mean, like even like I know Eowyn and Mary's scene there, with where they, they slice off the Nazgul's head, like that whole
Yeah,
scene has been pulled apart, reinterpreted, re-angled, and it's like in the end, I loved what Peter Jackson did with it. I mean, the fact that a lot of those female characters were brought to the forefront, regardless, that's why I identified it, right?
yeah,
Like as much as yes, I freaking love Aragorn, like hello, but you had Arwen who's like saving Frodo and cutting herself and running through and like riding horses. Then they freaking Eowyn who's just the badass of all, badass women, in that thing. And then Galadriel, like it was never ending. And I was like, this is really cool. And that's very subtle. There was only three
yeah.
huge female characters in this massive cast, but it meant so much to me. It meant so much to have that there. And even just that small little dose of it was more than enough at the time. Right.
Yeah.
But in the end, the world is changing. Are you going to change with it? Or are you going to be stuck in your head? If so, fine. Keep writing what you want to write. There is an audience for it, I'm sure, so continue, but it shouldn't limit you in any
Yeah.
way. All this means is that the world has opened up. You can now explore different point of views. Like that's what I always loved about fiction was because like you can read it and you could be a boy in one book and a girl in another book with a different mindset, but it doesn't mean anything to me as a person. It doesn't affect who I am. My identity is still safe, but I get to explore those different mindsets. That is so cool. Like it has such an incredible power. So why not embrace it? Right. Rather than, shy away from it and go, girl cooties, I don't want them in there. It seems so trivial now. Right.
Yeah.
But no, absolutely. Yeah.
I just
That's
think
why I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. I
For
just
the YA audience, it's like totally taking over there. So
yeah. Well, it's even like John Flanagan, like I love his Ranger's Apprentice series. Like I loved it. I still do. I haven't even finished the last book because I just can't. But then I have to because then I have to get to his Royal Ranger series, which is his the main character's daughter. And I really want to.
awesome.
And I was like, look at John. Like John's a good example of of somebody who had great success with young male characters, but even in his original books, the female characters I think really stole the show because without them, like the main characters, like two main male characters, would they be dead? First of all, like they couldn't get anywhere without them. So he's one of those people that I've always modeled myself after, and he's just awesome, and he's got a lot of different characters from different backgrounds and stuff, and I give him kudos for giving his main characterization over to a female character. You don't see a lot of successful male authors do that, and
and it's brave. It truly is brave, and it's such a small thing to do, and yet it impacts so many people, and if it's like really, if you're not going to do it, are you really wanting to cut out that many people that you could bring your work into and change their lives, for the better? It's like, why wouldn't you want to do that? I don't understand.
Well, it's like Daniel Aronson, his Moth series. Oh my gosh, like without the two female characters, I mean, there's no story. Like there's literally no story. And he took so it's such a great concept of a book. Like so he takes this world and it stopped revolving. So this is all in day now forever, and this side is all in night. So the people
cool.
evolve according to their side. So you have one
Right.
side where it's basically like drow, and they're very dark skinned, they have, you know, light hair, and they almost have like an Asian type culture. And it's he just did such a good job. And then it's about like this other side, which is more like European, and then the two meet. And I mean, the two main characters, it's just like the two main female characters were some of the best characters I've ever read from anything. And the one in particular
That's
from the
awesome.
dark side, yeah, like I mean, it was just it made me think of so many concepts. I'm so glad that I was able to find him at a time where I was, because that's where I had started writing again. And I was just like, oh, this is so interesting. And his characterization is just amazing. But he's another one where it's like, I can't imagine his books being as good without the female characters, and, you know, having, you know, different races in there. Because I mean, he made me think of writing and reading in such a different way. So I think that
Yeah, there's
really
a
helped.
university out. Yeah, there's like a universality of it, I guess,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that sense. You know, it's like it's so far reaching, and that's the thing. In the end, like we shouldn't have to question any book for these things. It
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
just all be in there naturally, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
my new YA fantasy that I'm writing, or that I finished and I'm querying right now. It's in a world where just love is love, and everything's just like it. There's zero question about it. It's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
character is introduced. Are they a villain? Are they not? Are they morally gray? Are they in
Yep.
between? You know, and that's the only thing you should worry about is the
Yeah. Yeah.
adventure, is the story, is the history, is the choices, you know, because or are the choices. And like that's what makes books so great, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, oh, where did they come from, or what are they doing, or it's just how do people operate, and people
Yeah.
is so inclusive.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah.
Right, so yeah, no, I'm excited for where this world is heading.
Yeah.
Still got a lot to work on, but
Yeah.
regardless, you know, I mean, if we can each play even the smallest part to evolving the world in that sense, like I think that's just a win no matter what.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, it's
yeah,
like Steven
for
Erickson,
sure.
like we're almost done with Mal's Book of the Fallen. And I mean, you know, Steven Erickson, like I like how he does it because it's so ingrained in his world, like different races, different sexual orientations, you know, people's, you know, sexual preferences. Like, you know, we had my friend and I, like, you know, we come from very different backgrounds. And my best friend, and like, you know, he was like, did you did was that he's like, were these two guys together? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure, you know. And he goes, well, that was very subtle. You know, he's like, it just felt like so natural. And then that was like the first time I think was in like book 4. And then the more we got on, it was like, it was just, it'd be here, it'd be there. But, you know, and he was like, wow, he goes, this is, we both said, we're like, how is I can't believe no one's ever mentioned it. But Steven Erickson, I think, did such a good job of inclusion, because you have women, you have people of different races, you have different sexual orientations. I mean,
Absolutely
whatever.
naturally. Yeah,
Yeah, it was just,
exactly.
it's so
Yeah.
done naturally. It's not like, you know, in your face, which I don't think is also a bad thing, but it was just so naturally ingrained in his world that you almost didn't notice because it was so subtle, and it had nuances in every facet. And he's a historian and archaeologist, so an anthropologist, sorry. And I just think that he did such a great job with the, you know, the sociology of his world. It was just like,
Yeah.
I was like, I like that, because I think it shows a more like my view on it, where people are just people and relationships are just relationships. And, you
Exactly.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And
I
it
agree.
all has to do with people's choices, and that no matter what, it varies from person to person,
Yeah. Yeah.
within
Yeah.
cultures, with outside of, you know, religion, within religion, you know, people operate very differently, and that should
Yeah.
be what we're looking at, is the human condition and human
Yeah. Yeah.
choices, and you know, all of that. So it's just like if you can change one person's mindset so that you have that where he goes, oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
That is the biggest win of all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to notice it, because it should be just part of our
It
lives, you
should. I
know,
think. Yeah. I think
no
you
matter
said it
what.
very well. Yeah. Yeah. No. Totally. Yeah. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I felt like he captured the feeling so well of how I feel about it. Where I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. You know, like you be you. I just thought he did a really good job with it. But
Yeah. That's awesome.
all right, so this was almost one of the questions that I ruined earlier, but I was trying to wait till now. How many books do you plan in this first series, and within this universe?
So right now it is fully outlined. It's
Cool.
outlined as a duology, but you
Oh,
never
cool.
know. You
Yeah,
never
yeah.
know where that can lead.
I
I've
like
always
that.
wanted I've always wanted to write a trilogy, but at the same time, I let the story kind of speak for itself. So, like, are all of the questions answered that should be answered, or are the character arcs full, right? So, I mean, a lot of it is quite honestly a journey for me because you could have a character suddenly shout from the sidelines, excuse me, I'd like a entire
Yeah.
side story here.
Hello.
It's like, okay, well, fine then. I'll go with that. But right now it's aimed for duology because
Awesome.
I really like how, so once again, I'm inspired by images. So I've already designed the second book cover
Cool.
in hopes of it, and because I'm just a very visual person, and I find colors and images, like, no matter how subtle, can kind of inspire me in different ways,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So I have it, and I guess the only thing I can really reveal is that my goal is to have the second book like red themed. So the first one is
Oh,
very
that's cool.
blues, purples, it's everyone's journey and into becoming an adult and coming of age, but also like the calmness within somebody when they know what their fate is, and yet right after that everything's going to be completely upended. So that's when the reds come in, the anger, the passion,
That's
the
cool.
I'm going to question myself and question those around me, and you get a little taste of it at the end of the first book, and so I really want to see that full evolution and how it can kind of once again kind of cycle back and
Yeah, yeah.
show the entire character's journey. So again, I'm a very visual person, so I'm hoping for duology, but you never know.
Unless you
I'll
find
have
a
to
third, and
maybe
then
tap. Yeah, I'll have to tap into another color or something
yeah,
like that
yeah, yeah.
too. So yeah, but the universe. Sorry, my dog a little bit. The universe itself. Oh my gosh, I absolutely love it, and I think that there's so many different ways of angling it, whether it's a prequel series or not. Again, it's more just based off of what am I excited about,
Yeah.
what's going to draw me in. But I feel like, again, like this universe especially has like zero limitations, and for me, like I could like what was super exciting for me was I could see this as a TV series, I could see this as a
Oh, that's
movie, and
cool.
everybody could say that, but for me the excitement of being able to create something that has that episodic
Yeah.
pull, like that's always the goal for me, right?
Yeah.
Like I want you to not want to stop reading, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, a lot of it I'm still learning, and much everybody, an author's journey never really quite ends.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just constantly evolving, constantly learning, constantly growing and adapting, so yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean, my other book is quite a different approach, so I'm
Yeah.
pretty excited to explore different worlds for now, and then we'll see if we go back to it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That's awesome.
thank
For
you.
that seventh one there, I'm really interested in this answer. So who are some of the sci-fi and fantasy authors that have influenced your writing as an author?
Oh goodness. Well, Anne McCaffrey, obviously. The Dragons of
Author.
Fern. That was
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness. Like it was so pivotal to me because again, it was like I don't know, it was just such a mystery. Again, you didn't know what to expect, right? And I
Yeah.
loved how she adapted that, like the world that she created. It was something so familiar, and yet at the same time, you're kind of like, oh, but what does this mean? Where will this lead, right? I love that. I'm gonna say somebody who's kind of not, but more myths and legends, obviously, like the Da Vinci Code, right? Like, I mean, that entire book
Oh, yeah.
was huge for me because it was the mystery aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's how can I answer something that seemingly already has been answered? And I think that tone of, again, questioning your own knowledge and challenging your own knowledge was something that was super important to me. But beyond that, obviously, it's like Piers Anthony, Neil Schusterman, Melissa Myers. Like she wrote
Oh,
a
yeah.
fantastic YA series, The Lunar Chronicles. Oh my goodness, it was so underrated, and it was one of my favorites. Cinder was the first one, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
basically taking Cinderella and twisting it on its head. She's a cyborg and living in this totally cool, like fascinating world, and I was like, that excitement of the young adult sphere, I want to pull that in. So it's funny because I guess a lot of the authors that I'm inspired by, they're kind of cross genre, cross ages, cross everything, because I'm pulling so many different aspects that made me want to read more books of theirs. What was it that made me push further, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, those are the big ones. Julie Kagawa, oh my goodness,
Oh,
like her entire Talent series, like just all of it. It's just so cool how people are taking these unique aspects. And one of my favorite authors recently is Alicia Dow. She wrote The
okay.
Sound of Stars. She actually endorsed my book, and I was
That's
so
awesome.
shocked and I was so excited. So it's at the very top of my cover if you guys want to take a look.
That's cool.
But just having somebody that I was reading, she's breaking the mold in a lot of ways, you know, in terms of representation, in terms of, again, that self-identity and self-challenge. And it was beautifully done. And she's creating this science fiction world. And I'm like that's so cool. That's so important to me, right? So I'm definitely inspired by her as well. So yeah, and the fact that she endorsed my book was just like,
That's
okay,
super cool.
my life's made. That's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. So yeah, definitely. But yeah.
That's super cool. Jealous. For our last one there, do you have any promos, news, updates, or anything like that that you like to share with us?
I guess the biggest one is that Of Us and Them is becoming an audiobook, and
Oh,
I
that's
am
so cool.
so excited. So I actually was able to, via TikTok, I ended up coming across this narrator, and I was like, I know her and I know her voice. And it's Natalie Naudus, who has narrated, she's narrated Victoria Aveyard, she's narrated Marie Lou, and I'm just like, her voice, like she's an opera singer as well, right? And just the beautiful resonance of her voice, I'm like, that's what I want. Like, if anybody's going to read my book, clearly it's not going to be me, you know, because I hate hearing my own voice. You know what I mean? My parents are like, why don't you record it? And I'm like, no, I can't do that. Like, I can't ruin my book that way. Her voice is so fantastic, and she's also multiracial like me and Everin. So that was a huge additional connection to that. And obviously she's extremely talented, you know, so getting her on board is super exciting. So it's going to be coming summer 2022. Of Us and Them also recently won the as a distinguished favorite for the Independent Press Award for 2022, and that's going to be announced on Monday. So I'm very excited about that. I'm querying my new series, and yeah, that's pretty much it. But I'm working on the sequel, and I'm just really excited to share it. So hopefully down the road, you know, I'll be able to release that soon, and you know, continue everyone's journey and see. Hopefully, if it concludes, I'm aiming for it to conclude, but we will see. We'll see if she's okay with that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are the big updates in my life. So.
Oh, that's super cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Congrats again on you know, being nominated. That's a like you said, right? It's a great sticker to have on, you know, on the.
Oh, it was absolutely. I was so surprised, and especially in the young adult fiction section, you know.
Yeah.
So there's one winner and 3 runner-ups in a way, and distinguished favorites, and the fact that I made the cut was really it was such a huge honor, you know, and seeing it just being, I guess, recognized at a different level is really cool. So, because I mean, you always hear from your friends and family, oh, I loved your book, you know, but it's different, right?
Yeah. Well, I just think that, you know, YA, like my mom was teasing me. She really wants me to write a children's book for my nephew, and like both of them. And I'm like, Mom, I'm like, that's a lot of money. It's a lot of work. I was like, I was like, I'll just get you your copy. I was like, I'll just do it for you. But I was like, it's just so hard. I was like, I said, other than YA, I said, that's the hardest genre to get into. But YA too is, you know, it's very difficult. So for you to, you know, get that type of recognition, I mean, you know, that's amazing. Like YA is a very good. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that even just recently again, that, you know, I just don't think indie's changing that much, you know, where YA is that much easier. So I think that is, I mean, I know that's a huge accomplishment. So that's really awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, and like the fact that my journey was through a small publisher this time, you know, whether it's self-pub in the future or agent in a big 5, like as long as I get my stories out there, I'm really excited about that. And yeah, I mean, no matter what, it's there. I can read its pages and flip them, because I'm still like a very physical book person. As much as I read, I do both, but I don't know, it's something different, you know, to add to your own library. To have your book there is just such a cool feeling. So
if I could afford it, I do all paperbacks, but I just can't. So especially
oh my gosh,
with Amazon, like it's just like it's impossible. You know, $20. And then I found out recently that, you know, like for instance, if I get, like when I got your book on Kindle, like I found out that you know, like a couple of my friends, I was like, I think it was CM Quinn said that you end up making like almost like 60% or 48%, I think she said 48% more than a paperback. And I was like, well, I've been thinking that you guys are making more on paperbacks. I was like, I'm just going to keep getting everybody on Kindle. And then I was like, I'll just get the people that I really like on paperbacks and try and get them signed later. But And there'll just be a twofer
Yeah.
or something like that. But yeah, that's super cool.
That's awesome.
Well, like our
That's
audience
awesome.
knows, you'll be able to find, your links, everything right in the description. So again, make sure you're checking out T.L. Coughlin's website. Go check out, this book. I think if you guys need, once again, if you need more than the title, the cover and the blurb, I don't know if this is the podcast for you. I feel like everybody we've had on is, really matched the genre and, has been interesting. So your book definitely has, I always wait to determine my to be read pile to, really mountain, after people, because it's one thing to read your blurb, it's another thing when you, actually are discussing
Meet the
ideas.
people.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's a lot
exactly.
different because it sounds more interesting than even just, the amazing blurb. So definitely moved up for my
Thank you.
TBR. So I'm going to be trying to get Black Flame by Will White done today. And so
Awesome.
I'll actually be reviewing your book on my channel too. So I had a lot of people ask. So you guys can go ahead and it will be a spoilers review. So I'll make sure I put that there. But yeah, I really
there will
look
be
forward
lots of
to it.
spoilers.
Yeah. I really
It's a
look
murder
forward to
mystery,
it.
folks. You
Yeah,
can't
right.
get around those, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Totally.
definitely.
Well, I want to thank you
That's
so much
awesome.
for coming on. I learned a lot today from you. So thank you so much. That's why I do these. So again, I look forward to, checking out your book later, hopefully tomorrow by the time I get to my Kindle. But yeah, anytime you want to come back on and, talk mythology, writing, fantasy, sci-fi, whatever, any news or updates, and you want to get them out there, you're got a spot to do that automatically. So I look forward, to those kind of things in the future for you.
Thanks so much for having me on this. I had such
Yeah.
a great time. And it's always fun to talk to people who have a
I
like-mindedness
agree.
with the mythology and the legends and the
Yep.
sci-fi fantasy, because sometimes you feel like you're screaming out into the void, but people
Yep.
like you with fantastic podcasts are really making those connections to cross authors, cross readers. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. So thank you.
Oh,
Thank you
and
very much for what you do.
yeah. My tech guy will also, a couple of people will kick me if I didn't say this because I forgot earlier, but I will be doing panels as well. So I do have you and PL Stewart down as inviting back for combining mythology and fantasy. So I will be sending
Awesome.
information out for those panels for this summer. So be on the lookout for that email. So
Love it. That's great. Fantastic.
awesome. Well, you have a great rest of the day, and I hope you enjoy your weekend. And I will talk to you later and send you email and maybe on Twitter as well.
Thanks so much. All right.
Have a good one. Bye.
All right. Bye.